Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my final verdict on the Voigtländer Ultron 40mm f2, and this is the SL2 version in the Canon EF mount. If you didn't see it previously, take a look at my first look and build quality episode where I break down in greater detail the physical attributes of this lens along with comparison to its primary competitor, and that is the other 40mm pancake lens, Canon's own 40mm f2.8 STM lens. But just to highlight a few of the details from that, obviously this is a beautifully built manual focus only lens, and in almost every way it feels very much like a Zeiss classic lens, and it's all metal and glass construction, very high grade, very beautifully made, and what really stands out to me is the focus ring itself, which is an incredible joy to use. It is perfectly damped and smooth, and the focus throw is exceptional on it. I found it to be really quite an easy lens to focus with the combination of focus confirmation, a nice focusing ability there, and then of course I've used it a lot in a body like the 6D where I have a EGS focus screen that allows me to see true depth of field. And in that kind of application I really actually enjoy shooting with manual focus lenses, find it a very organic type process. Even on a 5D Mark IV, however, I found that the focus calibration chip is quite well calibrated. And so as a result, if you will just kind of depress the shutter halfway and with the point that you want, the focus point that you want set where you want it to be, if you will just slowly come towards the plane of focus, as soon as it beeps and that focus point lights up, click the shutter button the rest of the way, and I found that the results are really quite consistent through that means. Not maybe as good as with the EGS focus screen, but very good. Of course, on a mirrorless body where you can magnify the image right in a optical viewfinder, it's easy peasy then, piece of cake to focus the lens like that. Other things that stand out about this lens is that it actually has two options when it comes to a filter size. Included with the package is this little tiny adapter / lens hood. And believe it or not, although it's very small, it actually does have a flocked interior. It is a serious lens hood, and most of the time you can just leave it in place. However, if you want to use 52mm filters, you can just use the lens without the lens hood in place. If you put the lens hood on, it not only provides the adapter, which I'll cover more in just a second, but it also gives you a secondary option in a tiny little 39mm size in terms of the filter threads. It also means that the pinch cap that comes with it is in that tiny 39mm size, and as a result, it is, I believe, the smallest pinch cap that I have ever seen. It's also my least favorite part of the overall build quality here for the simple reason that it feels a little bit flimsy. It is so small that getting the center pinch portion, my fingers don't even fit in there. And beyond that, I find that it doesn't seat always as well as what I'd like, and I feel like in a lot of situations when I'm putting it on, putting it in and out of a camera bag, I've just found that it pops off more often than what the typical lens does. The secondary purpose of that adapter is that the lens in and of itself, it has a fairly, average 0.14 times magnification. A lot of 50mm lenses come in at around 0.15, and so it's in the hunt, I guess. Canon's own 40mm f2.8 has right around a 0.2 times maximum magnification, and so that's considerably better. However, it does come with what is known as a close-up lens that will screw into that adapter. It basically provides one more glass element, which allows you to focus down much closer than what you can, and thus it bumps up that maximum magnification figure to a 0.25 times, or a 1:4 life size, which is a very useful figure and certainly adds the use, kind of expands the usefulness of this lens. It comes at a cost though, much like using an extension tube. It robs you of the ability to focus out to infinity and actually forget focusing out to infinity. I find that really you can focus to a distance of roughly here, a little over a foot away from the front of the lens and no further out than that. And so that means that you can't just screw it on there and forget about it. It means that you're going to have to only use it in those situations where you do want to focus at something that is very close. As a result, I feel like while I'm glad to have it, I think that it ends up in practice being a little bit more of a gimmick, and that there are probably a lot of situations where either A, you don't have the close-up lens along, or B, you just really don't want to mess with screwing something in and out, and you just want to take the shot. And so, yeah, great that it has it, and it does, provide a unique feature there, but at the same time, maybe not one that is always all that useful. I have a full episode here where I have dedicated to the image quality and compared it against some of the natural competitors. And if you haven't seen that, take a look at this episode where I interactively break down that and compare it to lenses like that Canon 40mm along with the 50mm f1.8, the Tamron 45mm f1.8 lens, just some natural alternatives there at that focal length. Beyond that, however, just to sum things up, really the lens does a lot of things well, but almost nothing exceptionally. It is quite sharp even from wide open, and that sharpness is fairly consistent across the frame. However, it is certainly not sharper than any of the competitors, save maybe the 50mm 1.8 along the edges of the frame. And it does a pretty good job of controlling chromatic aberrations, but at the same time you will find a little bit of fringing in certain situations. When it comes to the flare resistance, it really does quite good, even with that tiny little lens hood being a part of the equation. And as a result, while it does flare some wide open, it has a very unique kind of circular flare pattern that I suspect many people will find quite artistic and find an actual use for. If you don't want that pattern, all you've got to do is stop the lens down, and ghosting basically disappears altogether, and there's a little less veiling or loss of contrast as well. And so overall, it does pretty well in that regard. It does exhibit some distortion, not necessarily an exceptional level, but it definitely has some distortion, and so that's something that's present. It does vignette, but at the same time, the vignette is not particularly heavy, which is kind of surprising considering that it is such a tiny little optic, less than an inch long. And so, like I said, a lot of ways it does pretty well, but in no way does it do really exceptionally. The one place where it kind of stands out in my mind has been when it comes to the overall color rendering, which has a very nice, almost Zeiss quality to the color rendering, which is very nice. And of course, compared to the Canon 40mm f2.8, it has a full stop brighter maximum aperture of f2, which means that it's certainly more useful in low light situations. And also, because it has the larger maximum aperture, it means that even at equivalent aperture and focus distances, it does create a little bit softer background and larger and softer bokeh highlights when compared to the Canon. And so overall, it does a lot of things well. This kind of review process has been a little bit different for me. I actually began reviewing the lens back in March, but because it is discontinued at a lot of my normal retail sources, I just went ahead and purchased a used copy off of eBay because I was personally interested in it and wanted to evaluate it to see if it was something I wanted to keep in my own personal kit. So I've taken a little bit more time with it, and I've used it on a variety of different bodies, 2 Canon full-frame bodies, 5D Mark IV, and then a 6D. I've used it on a crop sensor 80D body, and then I've even used it on a Sony a7R II. And so I've been able to experience it in a variety of different ways, and as I've been evaluating whether or not this is a lens I want to keep in my own kit, my mind kept going to another small manual focus only lens, and that is the SMC Tacumar 50mm f1.4. Now obviously 40mm is not 50mm, but you basically use them in a pretty similar way. They're both considered within the range of a normal lens pretty much, and so while this isn't a pancake lens, as you can see, it's still very compact, it's still very easy to bring along. And so to me, the one thing that was standing out in this lens that cost $450 is that it had pretty nice color rendition and it had a brighter maximum aperture. But I kept thinking of this lens that also has really beautiful color rendition and has an even full stop brighter maximum aperture at f1.4. And I also know that it has some really beautiful bokeh and drawing from it. And at the same time, it's often available used. It's old. It's like 40 years old, the copy that I have. But it's easily adaptable to many camera bodies. And the copy that I have, I find it to be just very useful. And I keep reaching for it a lot of times. So I thought I would do a head-to-head comparison, since you can usually nab something like this for $100 or less. And so let's jump in and let's look at a direct head-to-head comparison between two kind of vintage sensibility manual focus only lenses. And so this is f1.4 versus f2. So we'll stop the Tachymar down, but understand that it's not going to show it because I just have an adapter that always shows f1.4. So in the center of the frame, it looks like wide open that these are roughly similar. If we move out towards the edges of the frame, at f1.4 versus f2, the Voigtländer is sharper, I would say, and has better contrast, but it's not necessarily huge either. And so as we look here on the right side, I would say that, you know, the Tachymar actually looks pretty good by comparison at f1.4, and I would give the edge on this side to the Tachymar. So if we compare them apples to apples at f2, we find that, for one thing, there's definitely less vignette that's present on the Tachymar lens, and furthermore, if we look out towards the sides of the frame, it definitely favors the Tachymar, which doesn't surprise me, as it continues to be both a very sharp lens when stopped down a bit, and it also has very nice rendering. And so, you know, that's a little bit disturbing to me that this old lens can compete so well and, you know, kind of deliver very similar, if not a hair better results. If we stop them both down to f2.8, they're both delivering a very, very sharp result in the center. And if we look towards the sides of the frame, I think I like the Voigtländer maybe a hair better, and I definitely like the light kind of transmission and overall kind of color balance that's coming off the Voigtländer better overall. But, you know, as you can see, they really are very close, and on this side the Tachymar is really strong and definitely is delivering a better result compared to the Voigtländer. We'll take it one more to f4, and here, of course, very, very sharp in the center on both lenses. Out towards the edge of the frame, both very sharp. There's a little bit different in exposure value, and but as you can see in the extreme corner, I would say that the Tachymar is a little bit sharper in the extreme corner here. Looking on this side, definitely Tachymar, as we have seen throughout the comparison. Now here's the thing that really, I think, kind of bugged me more when I consider this comparison. And so if you shoot these both at f2, as I've done here, the sharpness on the plane of focus, I would say, favors the Voigtländer. But as you can see, as you look at the background, even at equivalent aperture, it is much, much smoother from the Tachymar lens. And look at particularly at this kind of zone here, where you've got some general busyness, where everything is nice and soft on the Tachymar. And, you know, that's the part that leaves me questioning whether or not to keep the Voigtländer. I love the bokeh rendering from this Tachymar lens. It really is lovely. Here's another comparison. They really deliver out in the real world, they deliver a more similar color rendition than not. And at f2, I do favor the sharpness a little bit from the Voigtländer in some areas of the frame, but as we look towards the side of the frame, particularly this right side, look how great the Tachymar looks. Very, very crisp results. So that's pretty impressive. Another similar result here, just to give you another kind of visual comparison. Look at color rendition, the overall drawing from the lenses. One final example, I really do like the color rendition coming out of the Voigtländer, but then again, I also really like the colors that I get out of the Tachymar. And again, shooting this scene, the difference in the bokeh definitely favors the Tachymar in terms of overall just softness. It really does quite a beautiful job in rendering the backgrounds. And so, you know, that's something to bear in mind. So as you can see, the SMC Tachymar, it really holds its own. And I believe that it offers up just as nice of color rendering, but with much more pleasing, less busy bokeh backgrounds. And of course, the potential of shooting it at f1.4 and that extra bit of light gathering. Now, you do give up a few things. This Voigtländer lens, it's designed for modern camera bodies, and in this case, a Canon EF mount. And so it has a full electronic suite, including electromagnetic aperture iris, which means you can control the aperture from inside the camera body. And with the old SMC Tachymar, it has the old-fashioned aperture ring, and so you've got to manually set your aperture value. It also means that in some cases it may not meter perfectly. However, I do know how to use the lens at this point. And so I think it's a valid alternative. If you are kind of interested in the concept of a small, beautifully built manual focus lens that can give you some beautiful results that are different than a lot of modern lenses, I think that this is a very valid alternative, and it certainly is. I love the form factor. On a recent trip I took to Alberta, I knew I needed to carry along a telephoto, so I took the Canon 100-400L Mark II, and I took a 1.4 times extender for that. But to cover other focal lengths, I took the Voigtländer 40mm f2 and the Voigtländer 20mm f3.5. And I came home with a lot of gorgeous images taken from these tiny pancake lenses. And so they do have their value in portability. At the same time, I don't think that this Tachymar is not going to be able to travel in too many places where the little Voigtländer can't travel. And I think that, as we saw in the direct comparison, at equivalent apertures, it is equally sharp, in fact, sharper at some points in the frame, and you know, much cheaper. And so it's an interesting alternative if you want to consider that. If you look at my description down below, while B&H has discontinued this lens, I do have a retail source there where you can get it from Amazon.com. It retails for $4.49 there. And of course, there's also a link to my full written review along with a lot of other sample photos and observations. And then of course, there is a link to the image gallery that I've been adding to for months. So a lot of great photos there if you just want to go and look and see what this little baby is capable of. I'm Dustin Abbott, and thanks for watching today. If you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Have a great day.